I'm not sure if this lighting is acceptable. It is so dark in the UK. It's actually impossible to film. Like, I've got 2 ring lights against me right now. Cuddle to the heart. You won't like this book. It's a bit of a weird, quite literally the best reads of my entire life. I freaking love Fourth Wing. Ice Hockey Romances, Enemies to Lovers. Welcome to my beginners reading tips, beginners reading guide, I guess. I've got some books for you to read to get you into reading. There's a hair. I've got some books that might get you into reading, some easy romances, easy fantasy, kind of starting you off to every genre. Well, not every genre. The genres I most likely read, which is romance, fantasy, romantasy. I've read kind of a thriller, and I'm going to put that in there because that's the only thriller I read. I also thought I'd just give you some like cute little ideas to get into reading. But I thought I'd start off with the like book recommendations that I really recommend you read. They're easy reads. I have a Goodreads as well, which has my TBR on all the books I've read. That's always in the description of all my videos, so feel free to go follow me over there. We can become besties on Goodreads. So number 1, and these aren't going to be in order, I went through my Goodreads and kind of picked the books where I was like, that was a good book. Number 1 is The Spanish Love Deception. I read this a couple years ago, and to this day I remember this book. I don't remember what I rated it back in the day, but now, knowing that that book has stayed with me, I give it 5 stars. She is such a cute, easy, fun read. It's so wholesome. Hopeless woman. She's happy, she's light, she's funny, and then like grumpy man, but then like the man falls in love with the girl first. It's such a cuddle to the heart romance. For kind of an opening to romance, I'm gonna sneeze. I think it's perfect if you're getting into reading, because there's nothing to it which is like a trigger warning, or nothing to it which is like, you won't like this book if blah. Next, proper like 180, Verity by Colleen Hoover. I am kind of hit and miss with Colleen Hoover. I loved Regretting You. That's another good book. Very good book. Loved It Ends With Us. Didn't love the film. I loved the film. Didn't love the press about the film. Didn't love Blake Lively in the press. Loved Verity, but haven't loved her book since. And Colleen Hoover's kind of a controversial author in the book community. I'm standing in the middle. Like, I have no opinion, but also I agree with both sides in some respect. Do with that what you will. You know, you can choose. I would always check if there's trigger warnings in the book, because there's been a couple times where I've read the book and I've been like, oh, this was not mentioned, or maybe I didn't check. Colleen's not afraid to write about things which are a bit stressful maybe to some, but I felt like Verity was just a cool book. It's a bit of a thriller. So this follows Loan Ashley, and she is a struggling writer on the brink of financial ruin when she accepts the job of a lifetime. Jeremy Crawford, husband of best-selling author Verity Crawford, has hired Loan to complete the remaining books in a successful series his injured wife is unable to finish. Loan arrives at the Crawford home ready to sort through years of Verity's notes and outlines, hoping to find enough material to get her started. What Loan doesn't expect to uncover in the chaotic office is an unfinished autobiography Verity never intended for anyone to read. Page after page of bone-chilly admissions, including Verity's recollection of what really happened the day her daughter died. Loan decides to keep the manuscript hidden from Jeremy, knowing its contents would devastate the already grieving father. But as Loan's feelings for Jeremy begin to intensify, she recognises all the ways she could benefit if he were to read his wife's words. After all, no matter how devoted Jeremy is to his injured wife, a truth this horrifying would make it impossible for him to continue to love her. It's a freaking cool book. It's just such a book. Like, you're on the edge of your seat for most of it, and it was just such a fun read. And I feel like, first of all, it's kind of a good introduction to how Colleen writes. Like, she's a bit of a weird, not in a bad way, writer. She's just not afraid to say things sometimes, and I'm like, wow, okay. And also, it's not like the typical romance. It is still kind of a romance, but it's not a he falls in love, she falls in love. Like, it is there's a whole roller coaster of things that happen to get to that point. And it's just such a cool book. Like, I really recommend it. If you haven't read it, definitely add that to your TBR. Next, we're going to move on to fantasy. Now, I've read these books this year, and these books were quite literally the best reads of my entire life. We've got Powerless and Reckless. Fantasy has my heart. I've read A Court of Thorns and Roses, which again, really recommend. It's not in my list because it's a series, and I feel like a series is quite a lot to commit to, and it took me ages to read ACOTAR because it's quite intimidating, you know, having 5 books to read. But if you do get into reading and you love a little bit of fantasy romancy, ACOTAR will change your entire life. But Powerless and Reckless, it is 2 books. I think there is a third one. No, there is a third one. There is a third one. Of course there's a third one. And I just loved Powerless so much. Let me tell you what the synopsis of Powerless is. She is the very thing he spent his whole life hunting. He is the very thing she spent her whole life pretending to be. Only the extraordinary belong in the kingdom of Ilya, the exceptional, the empowered, the elite. The powers these elites have possessed for decades were graciously gifted to them by the plague, though not all were fortunate enough to both survive the sickness and reap the reward. Those born ordinary are just that, ordinary. And when the king decreed that all ordinaries be banished in order to holy moly, I cannot speak. In order to preserve his elite society, lacking in ability suddenly became a crime, making Payden Grey a felon by fate and a thief by necessity. Surviving in the slums as an ordinary is no simple task, and Payden knows this better than most. Having been trained by her father to be overly observant since she was a child, Payden poses as a psychic in a crowded city, blending in with the elites as best she can in order to stay alive and out of trouble. Easier said than done. When Payden unsuspectingly saves one of Ilya's princes, she finds herself thrown in the purging trials. The brutal competition exists to showcase the elite's powers, the very thing Payden lacks. If the trials and the opponents within them don't kill her, the prince she's fighting feelings for certainly will if he discovers what she is. Completely ordinary. Powerless, honestly, is the best book I've ever read, probably in my life. It is just incredible. So yeah, basically Payden is an ordinary, but faking being an elite. Kai is a prince and he is an elite. Payden and Kai meet because Payden saves Kai and then she gets thrown in the purging trials, which are basically like the Hunger Games in different forms, and it's just a wild ride of absolute lovely times. It is so fun to read. I've read this 523 page book in like 2 days. I've never read a book so fast in my life. Like I said, they're shorter than most fantasy books, especially some of the ACOTAR ones, so it's just a great time, and there's only 3 of them, and it's such a calm and easy introduction to fantasy, because ACOTAR, there's a lot of things you need to know. Same with Fourth Wing. I freaking love Fourth Wing so much, and I love Iron Flame, and I love fantasy like this, all the popular fantasies, but I feel like Fourth Wing and ACOTAR, you kind of need to know a little bit of background about fantasy and like kind of have read a couple before you read them. Especially Fourth Wing. A lot goes on in Fourth Wing, which I was like, oh, if I did not read ACOTAR, Powerless and Reckless before that, I would not know what's going on. I feel like that's a great introduction, and it's just such a fun book. I feel like no matter what your taste is in books, Powerless and Reckless will cater to absolutely anyone and everyone. Moving on to the ice hockey romances. So if you have TikTok and you've been looking at books, ice hockey romances just have their own genre. Literally, like, we all love an ice hockey romance. And the most common one to read is Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. It's a good book. It's not my favourite personally, but it is a good book. My favourite are Behind the Net and The Fake Out. I don't know what it was about these. They just were so much more enjoyable for me to read. I feel like because Icebreaker was so like hyped, I kind of was expecting really, really good stuff, and obviously it's just an ice hockey romance. At the end of the day, you're not going to get incredible things because it's just a romance and it's an ice hockey romance. Whereas Behind the Net and The Fake Out especially, I loved it. Ice hockey romances are typically cocky captain and like shy or academic, shy, stubborn, kind of. The girl in the books always doesn't want anything to do with ice hockey captain or anything to do with ice hockey. There's always a reason for why she wants to be far away from ice hockey. Always like opposites attract, very golden retriever vibes from him, very like fun, resistant vibes from the girl, and it's always just so fun reading an ice hockey romance because you always know what you're getting into. She'll slowly fall for him, he'll be like, this is the girl I want, and they always get each other, and it's a great time. So I really recommend Behind the Net and The Fake Out. If you haven't read Icebreaker, also I recommend that. But if you have read it and you're kind of looking for your next ice hockey romances, or if you're kind of like don't want to go for the super trendy one first, maybe go for Behind the Net and The Fake Out. Another set of romances, I like to read series. I just find them so fun because when the characters like cross over or the stories cross over, I'm so here for it. So the next ones I want to tell you about are A Deal with the Bossy Devil and Failure to Match. I freaking loved Failure to Match. So A Deal with the Bossy Devil, I rated it 3 stars. This follows Rhea and Adrian. Rhea works for Adrian. Adrian is a millionaire and basically hires her for 24 hours to get everything done. It is enemies to lovers, fake relationship vibes, only one bed, slow burning, grumpy / good girl, or like grumpy / sweetheart vibes. It was just a nice read. It wasn't crazy good, but it was a good read. Failure to Match follows Jamie and Jackson. Jamie is hired to basically find Jackson a wife. Jackson is a billionaire again, and he hates dating and basically makes every single date miserable for whoever he's dating, and he is with an agency to find him a wife because his parents, his family, blah blah blah, need him to be married and wifed up. So Jamie is hired to do that. Jamie then pretends to be one of the girls to go on a date to find out why he's so insufferable, and then it kind of like blossoms from there. She is very reluctant. He makes it like hell and she's like, I'm not backing down. And then obviously slowly he starts to like her. She starts to kind of not hate him. On the good reads, it's very much enemies to lovers, matchmaker, forced proximity, opposites attract, slow burn, main male character obsessed, and good girl vibes. It was amazing. Like, she has to move in with him because again, his aunt makes him agree to do everything he can to find a wife, and if at the end of these like 3 months or something, I think it is, if he can't find someone, his aunt will drop it, and Jamie is basically the one to do that. So she ends up moving in with him and finding out kind of some history about him. Then they go on dates. It is just a wonderful time. And again, it's romance, but it's a different kind. Like, it's not ice hockey, it's not super classical like generic romance. It's like a fun romance. Next, I've got The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. Ashley Poston overall is a really cool author. She writes very like odd books, I guess. She likes to deal with time and supernatural stuff, I guess. I read The 7-Year Slip, which is a great book. It wasn't my personal favourite, but it is a lot of other people's personal favourites, where basically a girl lives in an apartment and that apartment sometimes goes back in time and she meets a boy. They fall in love 7 years ago, and then kind of she meets him in present day, and it follows that whole thing, and it is a really good book. It's just personally not my favourite, but The Dead Romantics, incredible. I cried reading this book. This follows Florence and Benji. Florence is a ghostwriter, Benji is a editor. I've got a really itchy nose ring today. So yeah, Florence ghostwrites for another author and Benji is her new editor. They meet once because Florence is asking for an extension, I think that's what happened. And the next day she has to fly home because her dad sadly passed away. And then the next day she wakes up and at her door is the ghost of Benji, her editor. It basically follows them getting to know each other because Florence has powers where she can talk to people who are kind of between living and dead. So before they go off to either heaven or hell, she does something for them. Like, if they've got loose ends to tie up, she will tie them up. Then they kind of go on their merry way. She spends a whole time thinking he will go once she finishes writing the book, but obviously she's dealing with her dad passing away and the whole funeral thing, blah 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 blah. It's such a cool book. It's such a cool concept. Ashley Poston is so talented, and again, it's a romance but not in a typical way. And because it's like supernatural, you know, she's talking to ghosts, it's not just, oh, I love you too. There's so much more to it, and then it ends and you're just there like, what? Like, it's a massive mind boggle. So I really recommend that because again, it is a romance. I do love a romance, but it's just not the typical romance. It's a different type of romance. If you don't like romance, I'm sorry, because I'm probably not the person to go to. If you do like romance though, having different types of romances to read switches up and makes it way more interesting, because reading like bog standard romances is really boring, really repetitive, and quite annoying, honestly. Like, when you read the same sort of vibe, you're there like, really? This again? He's bought her another 1,000 roses? Like, come on now. So having like things to switch it up is so helpful. So lastly, to recommend, if you have heard of Elsie Silver, you have probably heard of her Chestnut Springs series, which is Flawless, Heartless, Powerless, Reckless, and Hopeless. They are very, very, very popular in the romance community. Romance readers seem to freaking love Elsie Silver. I have read Flawless, loved it, but I wasn't as into it as everyone else. Everyone else seemed to freaking love this book. So I kind of wanted to see Elsie Silver in a different way because I really want to love Elsie, but I wasn't loving Flawless. And then I found the Rose Hill series. So I've read Wild Love. It is such a beautiful book. This follows a single dad and basically her best friend's little sister. She moves back to town because she lost her job and he hires her. Oh yeah, no, I love this book. I'm thinking about this book now. He is a single dad. He finds out he's a single dad like in the first or second chapter of this book. And at the same time, the main female character moves back to Rose Hill because yeah, she lost her job and she's like, I'm just gonna figure out my life for a bit. The main female character is the main male character's best friend's little sister. He then hires her. I can't remember what for. I think he's rich. I think it's something to do with that. She ends up, you know, getting besties with his daughter. It follows him becoming a single dad and like realizing what on earth is going on with my life, and also obviously the main female character and main male character falling in love. It's a really fun way of doing romance. It's not the typical romance. It's probably the most typical, not enemies to lovers, but they were like bickery. He was her big brother's best friend, so it was like, but actually he was desperately in love with her from the get-go, and she was like, ugh, hate him, and then she's like, oh. It's just a really like wholesome, nice way of reading a romance. Again, like I said, I love switching up the way I read my romances because otherwise it just gets really boring. There are 3 books in the series. I've read Wild Love, I need to read Wild Eyes, and there's Wild Side, but I haven't heard anything about that. I feel like when you're getting into reading, you don't want to commit to like an 8-book series because that's a lot, and also if you're not a really fast reader, that's going to take you freaking ages, and if you hit a slump, it's so hard to get out of that slump if you're like knee deep in a series. So those are some book recommendations, and I thought if you're also kind of getting into reading, I would just recommend some things to do or get or blah 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 to help you on your reading journey. So number 1 would be making a Goodreads account. I freaking love Goodreads. You have your TBR, you have your read on there, you can do reviews, you can rate all your books, you can have reading challenges. It's quite an old app. Everyone says it needs updating and I fully agree. And there are other apps which I know are probably better, but we all just love Goodreads. So I definitely recommend Goodreads, getting that, making an account, putting all your TBR on there, follow your friends, follow your favorite YouTubers, etc. Like I said, mine is in the description if you want to follow me. Definitely look on TikTok for some book recommendations. There are some very like popular book talk books which you don't necessarily need, but if a lot of people talk about them, they're probably good. Definitely get Kindle Unlimited. I have it on my iPad and my phone, and I'm getting a Kindle this year for Christmas, so I will obviously have it on my Kindle as well. If you're traveling a lot or you don't have loads of time to read in the evening, or when you're home, or just you prefer reading digitally, Kindle Unlimited is incredible. I freaking love it. I read 80% of the time on my Kindle, well on my iPad, but on Kindle Unlimited, and it means you can read wherever you are, if you're on the train, if you're on the bus, if you're in a waiting room, you know, Kindle Unlimited just has you back. Don't set yourself kind of too many goals. When I was trying to force myself to be a reader, I'd be like, right, read 100 pages a day or read 50 pages a day. It's so easy to read a book when you like a book. So if you're really like forcing yourself to read, maybe DNF the book for a sec and then come back to it. I sometimes do that. I think we all do that, because maybe if you're not in the mood for a certain book, it's hard to be like, push through. So if you're not feeling a book, don't worry, just go back to it at a different time. And I think that's kind of it. I can't think of anything else. If anyone else has any suggestions, let me know. Like, watching book content is also really like fun and motivating to read. I have a couple YouTubers that I just watch religiously because I trust their taste. Also, like, make sure you try new things. Don't just find one thing and stick in that and like that, because that's what I did, and then I'd hit a slump and have nowhere else to turn to. Having like fantasy and the thriller in there, which was literally one, but you know, I don't really get bored of my romances, so I'm kind of fine. But if you are kind of prone to getting bored, or if you're kind of reading the same type of books, it's really hard to stay like really in it. So make sure you've got a good variety. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Just enjoy the process. Reading is meant to be fun. And it is a lot of fun when you read really good books. So make sure you've got a good selection. That is my little beginner's guide to reading. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe. I post book content as also just like lifestyle stuff. I've got Vlogmas going on at the moment, so I also vlog and do like weekly vlogs at the moment. Follow my Goodreads. Again, it is in the description. I also have like a bookie-ish Instagram, so that is Life with Rose, also in the description. And I will see you again soon. Kisses and hugs. Bye.